Howdy. Have you ever wanted to do a raid or a dungeon, but don't feel that you are good enough or your builds are made for that? Well, in this video, I plan on teaching you how to build for any raid encounter, dungeon encounter, nightfall, and any other in-game content you can think of. This is part 3 of the Weapons Masterclass series that I have going on, so if you want to catch up on both part 1 and part 2, they will be linked in the description, along with a spreadsheet that sort of details all of part 1 if you want to just skip that video. The point of this series is to teach newer or more casual players how to make and understand their own builds and how they work, and not just throw on whatever a build crafting YouTuber tells them to do. The first thing I want to talk about is building for normal mode raids, since that's what I imagine most of you are here for. If you want info on master raids, that section will be near the end after we talk about dungeons and exotic missions. For most raids, you are not going to be running the same build for the whole thing. Sure, you could, but you might not be the best teammate you can be like that. I'm going to divide raid encounters into 2 separate categories here: boss encounters and puzzle encounters. Just in case anyone asks, we will count all of the entrance encounters, such as barge and the DSC bubbles, under puzzle. Boss encounters are encounters that, as the name implies, have a boss or multiple bosses in them, and puzzle encounters are more built for team communication and movement. Although some encounters have both a strong puzzle element and a boss, Caretaker is the first example that comes to mind. Build crafting for the boss always takes priority over something movement-based like an eager-edged sword. Weapons-wise, for a boss encounter, you're going to want a DPS weapon, a backup DPS weapon, and an add clear weapon. Your subclass should also have a way to do bonus damage, something like a Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun, or a Needle Storm, or a Thunder Crash, or a way to support your team, like a bubble or a well. Yes, well will still be good after the nerfs, the community is just overreacting. For a puzzle encounter, you have a lot more options. Since puzzle encounters lack a boss enemy, they tend to pack in the adds, so add clear weapons or abilities are the #1 priority when it comes to these encounters. Additionally, Bungie also likes to throw in some majors as either part of the puzzle mechanic or as an annoyance while doing the mechanic, so a major melting weapon is also a good idea. In most puzzle encounters, I would argue that you are safe to run a movement tool like an eager-edged sword, although in some cases having a good heavy weapon is useful. For instance, a sacking wyvern in Vault of Glass Confluxes needs to be killed quickly, and not all special weapons can do the job fast enough, especially in master content. The key here is comfortability. If you know you can take out that yellow bar enemy in time with just your fusion, why not run an eager-edged sword for the dopamine rush of the movement? But if you are struggling to kill or take care of the enemy and potentially causing your team to wipe, be sure to put on a heavy weapon that can help you out with that. Back to building for boss encounters. A problem that sometimes comes up is someone will be so spec'd for DPS that they forget to run any healing whatsoever. Or even if they are running healing, it's not adequate enough to keep them alive in most situations. The only advice I have for people who are doing this, myself included on occasion, is being dead is less DPS than being alive, or no DPS is worse than bad DPS. Just value staying alive. If you are dying constantly, that's more of a burden than low DPS, which is another problem entirely that can be alleviated by just getting better at the game. I don't mean this in a rude way or mean way, it's just that a brand new player with Izzy Apex is going to do a lot less damage than someone who's been doing rocket swaps for a couple years. The next thing I wanted to talk about, since we are roughly in the vein of raid optimization, is heavy ammo generation. Why force a 3-phase because your team doesn't have the ammo when you could be generating ammo for them? You may be saying, oh well, I don't have Aeons or Cenotaph, and even if I did, I wouldn't want to keep track of them. Well, boy oh boy do I have some news for you. There happens to be 2 mods that slot into the helmet slot that generate heavy ammo for both you and your teammates simply by killing things with primary ammo weapons, especially exotic primaries. Just in case anyone asks the name of the mods are Heavy Ammo Scout and Heavy Ammo Finder. Make sure to run both, otherwise it will not make ammo for your teammates. In the last video, I mentioned that there are a couple instances where Sunbracers and Sunshot are a good combo, and this is one of them, allowing you to completely lock down an arena and make an astonishing amount of heavy ammo. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about in the raid section here is team composition. Although in higher difficulty activities, it may be beneficial to optimize team comp to maximize DPS output or survivability, in normal raid activities, it really doesn't matter that much. Especially with the well nerfs coming up in Final Shape, it will become even less necessary to need that well pop for max DPS output in living. In short, Don't go onto Warlock if you can't survive on it. Dying is just a liability to your team. Okay, dungeons and exotic missions. Basically raids with less commitment, and the builds reflect that. Whatever you would run in a raid puzzle encounter, you'd probably want to run in a dungeon puzzle encounter, and the same can be said about the boss encounters in dungeons and exotic missions. I'd argue that the only difference between the two is although some raids can be soloed, dungeons and exotic missions are built for it, and as such it's a lot easier to build for that. So if you never plan on doing a solo dungeon, you can probably skip this part, as all the rest of the info you need to know on dungeons and exotic missions matches the stuff in the raid section. So for solo dungeons and solo exotic missions, since you are becoming a one-man army, you need to be rocking a build that reflects that. Just as mentioned in the raid section, you will more than likely have to switch up loadouts on an encounter-to-encounter basis, just because what you may have been using on the previous boss may not work for this coming up puzzle encounter. In the more recently re-released Outbreak and Whisper exotic missions, it is beneficial to run an Eager Edge Sword because you have to do the work of 3 players solo in the same time frame. So that movement is just super helpful for that scenario. Once you reach the boss rooms for either mission, you can switch over to your preferred DPS weapon and just slay out. But the point is to not constrain yourself to not swap when you could get the job done quicker by swapping to something suited to what you are trying to do. At this point in time, however, solo dungeons and solo exotic missions are easy enough that you can do them on pretty much any subclass on any class. I remember seeing a guy back in the beginning of the season do a solo flawless Warlord's Ruin on Behemoth Titan just to, I guess, prove a point, I don't know, but with enough banging your head against the wall and lots of practice on a certain activity, you can just kill everything with anything at this point in the game. But if you're looking for your first solo or solo flawless dungeon or exotic mission, just use what is commonly known as good or busted or meta in whatever season or I guess episode now you may be watching this from. This section was originally intended to be on just nightfalls, but seeing as Legend, Master, and Grandmaster versions of activities share the same build crafting qualities as higher difficulty nightfalls, I decided to rope them all into the same section. The first and most important part of building for any of these activities is to check what the surges are. If you aren't running at least a heavy that matches the surge, you are throwing away the most free 25% damage buff in the game. If you want to go the route of saying that you don't have a good weapon that matches surge, then go farm one. The game is big enough that there are enough weapons that every amazing weapon has at least a solid backup, so you have options. Or if you don't have a good solar heavy, you could run Dragon's Breath or G-Horn. Both are easy to get and not bad options at all. As for team comp, it does matter what you run in higher difficulty raids and dungeons, because more likely than not, there are other people relying on you to help out either by DPS or keeping them alive. Generally, just check with your teammates as standard courtesy to see what they are running and how you can mesh best with them. If no one is on Tractor, they're on Tractor, same for Well or Lumina, etc. As for roles, the best thing to do is to make sure you know how to do everything. Don't just drop in, run Storm Trance, and claim ad clear unless you are speedrunning getting booted from the fire team. Another bit of info that is intended mostly at the Grandmaster side of things is to build around champs accordingly. This also means communicating with your team to try and cover the champ types needed across the 3 of you. Honestly, the takeaway here is to just be good at communicating. And if you don't have the skill for high difficulty activities, go get the skill. Practice in the normal versions or try solo dungeons. That's all the wisdom I have for this video. Hopefully you were able to learn something from this, and if you already knew all of this, thanks for watching all the way through. If you have any questions on a subject that I didn't cover, or questions on a subject that I did, please leave them in the comments as I will reply to every single one. Also let me know if you want me to cover any other topics. Thank you so much for stopping by.